So my apologies for doing Paul's talk this morning. He's not well. And I've swapped out one slide, which is not his slide, and eliminated two of his. He is much better at this, articulating the vision of the DTO than I am. I've been with the DTO for 11 weeks. So pardon me if I don't hit all of his talking points exactly right. Like me, he does not write speeches, he just does dot points. My delivery of his dot points will probably be slightly different than his delivery of his dot points. So one of the reasons for the DTO to exist, I guess, is that lots of services are moving online. We discussed that this morning. Obviously, there's a lot of issues that go with that. The purpose of the DTO fundamentally is to transform the way that government delivers services. There are cost efficiencies for this. There's also, though, the issue of consumers actually wanting a different experience. I try to use the word consumers rather than users, by the way. I'm trying to move away from the drug paraphernalia. And if you look at what the challenge is for government, in a lot of spaces, in the space that I'm in, for example, identity, the idea that government can just force people to do things is not delivering those financial benefits. Just because you can force somebody to do something in order to get a benefit or whatever it is doesn't mean that they'll come online and actually do it. And only by moving these services online can we get some of those economic benefits we're talking about. But also fundamentally, the landscape for consumers has changed in the last 7, 8 years since iPhones and things existed, which is that people expect from industry an experience, and they expect a similar experience from government. This has a lot of impacts in the way that systems are designed, but fundamentally it also points back to the way that the DTO works, which is user-centered design. So Paul's had a couple of decades of experience in large platforms and things like that. I've had about 8 or so doing big platformy kind of projects. And one of the things that I guess I bring to this is, having come from a commercial background, like Paul, we've actually had things I've had things in the entertainment space, for example, where getting users engaged is actually really, really crucial to making a service work. But the DTO is also set apart to not replicate the kind of government-centric IT processes. And the reason for this is that if you look at the way that IT was done, say, 10 years ago, typically you get a functional spec and a contract. And I worked for a little while. I've worked with about 4 or 5 different management consultancies on different projects. And I worked with one who shall remain nameless for a little while, where they had an internal quoting system. And it had the interface from hell. Now, the guy who built it got promoted because when the thing was delivered, they said, does it do this? Yep, tick. Does it do this? Yep, tick. Does it do this? Yep, tick. But when it came to actually using the thing, the interface was so horrendous that none of the partners in that business would actually do it. They'd make their EAs do the work. And they'd make their EAs do the risk profiles and all of that sort of stuff as well. Now, this is a terrible breach of internal risk rules. And I'm sure if the board knew about it, they'd have a conniption. But fundamentally, it goes back to that thing of you have to give people something that they can work with in order to get the compliance that you want. Human beings will go around systems that they don't like. And the history of technology tells us that if you look at Edward Snowden, for example, depending on how whether you go on the press accounts or his own accounts, he will say he didn't steal the credentials of other people at the NSA. But it's entirely possible that other people at the NSA gave him some credentials because it was too inconvenient for them to work with some of those things directly. Anyway, this is sort of the vision for Paul's vision for delivery at the DTO. These are our sort of fundamental principles. You can look at our digital service standard, which I have on a later slide, which articulates basically the principles that we use to govern the way that we do things. And you'll see, obviously, user-centered design. You'll also get the idea of the minimum viable product and our agile approach to things. And I bring that particularly to the identity space. The identity space is very complicated. If you try and solve the unified field theory of identity, you'll be here a really, really long time. The thing we do in a user-centered thing is look at what the pain points are for consumers. So, fairly obvious kind of statement. I don't think anybody in government would actually disagree with this statement. But how we go about that is the key point. And the interesting thing in conducting user research here is it's not enough just to ask people what they want. You actually have to see what they want. You actually have to test what they want. People will tell you different things about what their desires are than what they will actually do in the real world. And this comes down to our head of user research, Lisa Reichelt, has a good saying for this, which is that future me is much smarter than current me. And what she means by that is that in the future, when you are thinking about security, for example, you have the best intentions. Yes, I will do the right thing. That's future you. Right now, you just want to get stuff done. And future you will take shortcuts, even while you know that they're not the right things to do. It's like, oh, just this time, I'll take this shortcut. Because you're not thinking necessarily of what the bigger goal is. You just want to get stuff done. One of the key problems for government is, at the moment, that we have ecosystems of people that have grown up as intermediaries between consumers and government. And a lot of those people are probably going to dislike some of the things that the DTO does because we may be disintermediating a few of those services over time. But you can see, for example, that the process of complying with certain government regulations is so arcane that you hire a consultant to do it, or you hire a tax agent, or you hire various other people to do things for you to intermediate. The other point is that people don't really actually want to engage with government. They engage with government because, by and large, they have to. It's not really, anybody here have a really pleasurable experience engaging with government? This is not a bad thing for government, it's just the nature of the kind of work that's involved. It's either compliance, or there's a regulation, or there's a law, or something or other that forces you to do the thing that you don't want to do. So one of the things, the projects we have internally at the DTO is gov.au, not to be confused, by the way, with MyGov, and I will take no questions on MyGov. Gov.au, there are 1,500 websites that we've identified, and what we're trying to do, see, consumers don't know what they want to know about government. You as a consumer, if you were completely foreign to the world and hadn't already got a passport, where would you expect to get a passport from? As it happens, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. But would you know that? Would you go to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website to look at passports? Or would you possibly go to somewhere like immigration? Right? Seems unlikely, but there's all sorts of questions about where certain services can be delivered from. And you as a consumer don't know that. And government SEO is not so good that it's easy to tell from a search, given that the terms that are used by governments worldwide all tend to be very, very similar, and you may as well find a result from Canada in your first 5 results as you would from Australia. Right? So one of the things we're doing is bringing those multiple websites together to provide a better experience for people, give them the ability for them to find the things that they want in a logical way that works for them. And we've user tested this very, very comprehensively. We continue to iterate. All of our work gets tested as it goes. We just dropped an alpha of this particular project, for example. And we went through a lot of consumer testing. That alpha is now out for comment. It was assessed independently. And we'll be doing some more iteration on that now, and with a view to actually launching the thing into a beta at some point fairly soon. All of our work is done in the open. I did read something a couple of weeks ago where somebody accused the DTO of being mildly secretive about identity. That's something because I was just in the job, all right? It wasn't because I was particularly trying to hide anything. We have a blog, we publish things to our blog, and we are very concerned that people know what we're about and feed things back to us if they have concerns. So the thing is that our approach to gov.au is actually based on user research. It's actually, we didn't start out by saying, gee, wouldn't it be a good idea to bring all these websites together? We actually went to research panels, and we have a very thorough methodology for this kind of thing, and asked people what one of their pain points for government was. And a chief pain point was they didn't know where to find stuff. And then as we refined this proposal, we tested it and tested it and tested it again. And that's how we roll. That's just what we do. This is our digital service standard. This is in beta. We adapt it, and we will adapt it. This is actually adapted from the government digital service in the UK, tweaked slightly for Australia. We will continue to iterate on it. So again, if you have feedback on any of these sorts of things, we encourage these pieces. This is probably it's the last one, but it's the really key one. And it's that classic thing with usability. Nobody ever reads the manual, right? I sat in on a usability test, actually, of an identity verification system about 6 weeks ago in the UK, which was really interesting, because it's like, I haven't done any user testing for about seven or 8 years since I did web dev. And you kind of forget how that stuff works. But they brought in 4 people to do testing, and the first person who came was a 55-year-old woman. I thought she might struggle. She just breezed through the whole thing. The third person they brought in was a 21-year-old guy, and I thought, oh, digital native, he'll be fine. And he freaked out. And the reason he freaked out was they had a screen at the start with a lot of text on it explaining that what they were doing was verifying his identity, not collecting data. But he's 21, he doesn't read lots of text. He just clicked through on it, went through. So when he got to the 5th or 6th screen where they were asking him all this personal detail, he didn't realize that they already had that stuff. They were just asking him to verify it. He actually thought they were collecting stuff, all because he didn't read, right? And that's the sort of thing you discover in user testing. You might make the assumption, oh, well, we put a disclaimer, and this is a classic thing for government is we've got a disclaimer, we've got a thing, you tick the box to say you've done this. Nobody ever reads the EULAs, right? So fundamentally, make sure that it's simple for people to understand, test it and test it again. The other big one, which is not always popular, I've worked for a series of vendors over the last 10 years, so I understand how this is a bit contentious, but we like open standards. We don't believe in closed systems. And it's just purely from a cost of operations point of view and an ability for reuse. Fundamentally, we like the idea that other government agencies can use things that we do. We don't have to be the owners of absolutely everything in the government world. So this is our process. Every project goes through this process. It doesn't actually have to be an IT project. One of the things that I'm working on at the moment, for example, is a trust identity framework. So an actual framework for government to actually work with identity. But that will go through an alpha, which we'll deliver in August, and then it will go through a beta after that, after the comments and after testing, and after an understanding of whether or not people understand those concepts. If we fail at the alpha, and we will be independently assessed. So if we fail, it will never get to beta. We'll turn around and we'll start again, or we'll completely reassess the whole viability of the project. Unlike a lot of projects, we're not going to the Department of Finance for a gigantic bucket of money to start off with. We work in an iterative fashion. So one of the things that I was really pleased to see in Mike Burgess's thing this morning was the piece about business, being a business risk, not a technology risk. Because, and I have to say, I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to be talking about InfoSec, because I've run a few big platforms in my time, but I always hire people to do the nuts and bolts of that kind of stuff rather than me. But I will say that the problem that having run, for example, a big movie platform that had a lot of content from the Motion Picture Association of America, I've worked for a bank, their MPAA is much more paranoid than a bank. Working with that, what you understand is it's the human factors that trip you up, not the technology factors. The technology factors, you can hire people to help do things, but all the NIDs and HIDs is not going to save you if you've got somebody who is being socially engineered to give up their credentials. And why might they do that? Well, apart from the social engineering factor, they may also want, and this is an issue for government, they also want somebody else to act on their behalf without having that authorized. Or, for example, if you've got really terrible authentication, they might put their password on the side of the filing cabinet in the office, which, believe it or not, was actually a big factor in some of the Sony Pictures stuff, was that they had laptops lying around unattended in the security office and passwords on display. Crazy stuff. The point being, though, that if it's good service design, if people can use something simply and quickly and easily, they feel much less need to go around it. I think I mentioned before, we don't ask people. So in the identity space, for example, I'm not convening user research panels at the moment and saying, what do you think of your identity, digital identity? Because you know what? That's such an abstract concept to most people that you're getting the wrong answers to the question. If you talk to them about what their pain points are in transactions where identity is involved, then you start unpacking the things that you need to solve from a consumer point of view in terms of identity. Likewise, if you talk to people in government about why they have this level of assurance required and what those risk factors are, then you can begin to unpack why some of those vectors are built the way they are. But if you just ask them what they think, you get back, I think with Steve Jobs, the idea that people don't know what they want. It's actually not true. People know what they want when they see it. Right? They don't know what they want when they just think about it in the abstract sense. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that security needs to be based on real behavior, on what people actually do, not on what they say they do. So if you're working for a large management consultancy with an internal system that you don't like using, there's no point in asking the partner at that practice whether or not that system is secure. That's an irrelevant question. You're much better off asking the people who work with the system what their practices are around that system. And all of the actual environmental security isn't going to save you in that particular context. So there's a lot of talk given to privacy by design, and most people who've worked in developing major platforms know that a lot of this has to do with usability and convenience, but it's frequently overlooked in the process. A lot of people think this is just about establishing the security of your APIs and making sure that your environment is secure. It's really crucial to actually think of all the components, particularly the human components. As Mike said, it's a business problem, not a technology problem. There are technology aspects to it, obviously. But fundamentally, the risk is on the business side, and it's the people in the business and the people who are your customers who pose some of the greatest risks. And that is my time. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was incredibly disciplined, as we can expect.